Live services, absolutely everybody wants loads of them, including Sony, who made some pretty bullish plans, set up a bunch of things, and now are those things particularly maybe not going that well? Perhaps. It's time to find out. So, back in September, Herman Hulst showed us the future of PlayStation, and he is their studio's chief, so it's the sort of thing he would be talking about. Basically, it's all about a push for live services that would kind of go side by side to their big cinematic, like tentpole blockbuster games. More recently, they acquired Firewalk Studios. That happened in April. Firewalk, they were working on a live service title. There's also the small thing that is the acquisition of Bungie, who do Destiny. Now, speaking at the time to GameIndustry.biz, he was very confident in the future of these titles, most of which are planned for PS5 and PC, right? He basically talked about making a big old variety of games that could be referred to as live services, targeting different genres, release schedules, and different scales. Right, so that was kind of interesting. But then last week, the cracks started to appear because we heard about some first-party studio closures and mass layoffs from studios that have partnered with Sony. To basically go over that, there was allegedly a strategic review, and that didn't end well, for Pixel Opus, who are a first-party studio who have been closed. Then a shooter project at Final Strike Games that has been cancelled, leading to mass layoffs. I believe the number was like 40%. And then, and this is the one that'll hurt more, the studio that is basically rumored to be working on Sony's answer to Call of Duty having severe issues. Now, this is quite rough. Obviously, for Sony, Call of Duty is massive. Because they have the best first parties, it means that they are the multi-plat default. So Call of Duty is humongous for Sony. Anything that could involve Microsoft having more ownership or control over Call of Duty, obviously that's just going to mean they're going to want to have some sort of, combatant in the ring. So we basically have a situation where they placed many bets on many live services, but we seem to have things be crumbling, including from Deviation, who are comprised of ex-Treyarch people, and I think were Sony's real big hope to have a massive shooter hit on their hands. Right, let's break some shit down. Okay, in September, we found out some ambitions, and this is cracked. At 49% of their total investment by end of fiscal year 2022 was supposed to be in live service, with the aim of having 3 live service titles under their belt, with an intent of 12 live services by the end of fiscal year 2025. Which is quite mad. Herman Hulst said to Axios, quote, "We're not excluding bringing some of our beloved existing franchises into live gaming," and I think with that we all think about the obvious, which is The Last of Us multiplayer as a live service, right? It just kind of makes sense. So, we've got that going on. We've also got some big, lovely slides to break that sort of thing down, where, they talk about live services now, and what does it look like? Oh, look at all our really good games. NBA The Show 2022. Yeah. Room for improvement, I think, is what they realized. Now, MLB The Show is not going to be going anywhere, right? Obviously, they own Destiny now. There are then some leaked things. Okay, so this is what the leaks say. We've got a Guerrilla, that's the Horizon people, co-op game in the Horizon universe with Monster Hunter vibes, as well as, of course, The Last of Us multiplayer title, which seemingly has just evolved and evolved and evolved and became more and more, which, to be honest, I am totally down for. I didn't play much of it, but I absolutely had a fantastic time in the multiplayer of The Last of Us Part 1. Of course, at the time just called The Last of Us. Now, at the time, there were plans for 6 live services by the end of fiscal year 2023. Right now, we have 2. Of course, there were still, there's still plenty of fiscal 23 to happen, but we're going to need to see more. Now, at the time, we sort of argue that staff changes at one of Sony's partner studios pointed to some problems, and let's get into that. In 2020, Dave Anthony and Jason Blundell founded Deviation Games. Now, these guys were kind of like big names. Anthony had been the writer-director of Call of Duty Black Ops 1 and 2, and Blundell had been the co-studio head of Treyarch, the game director on the campaign of Black Ops 3, as well as the Zombies mode in Black Ops 3 and 4. Now, whenever I say there, the campaign of Black Ops 3, I'm fairly sure that is something that was significantly more like ambitious when it was originally talked about, but then those plans were like kind of like cut down a bit. So basically, industry heavyweights in the shooter space. They found that studio, and then in 2021, they signed an exclusive sort of publishing deal with PlayStation, and it was something we've been working on for a year. Herman basically said, bring a big new IP, standing the shoulders of guys who have, all the stuff that they've learned over their career, going to be a great addition to the PlayStation portfolio, right? They put out no info on genre, scope, content. They just said it was AAA, left us to speculate on the rest. Now, per leaks, we had, pretty big inkling that they would be going to Sony's sort of big live service ambitions. Here's a bit of a leak. They're working on a world-class FPS that is planned to be supported for years, if not generations. It will have many game modes, including heavy story-driven single-player campaigns and multiplayer aimed for arcade and competitive. So, it's a Call of Duty competitor. But then, we found out in September 2022 that this studio is actually a revolving door, with many of the staff leaving, and also COO/founder, Mr. Blundell, gone, right? Yep. He went, and we found out via a senior games artist on Reset Era that they've seen a mass exodus and the studio is a revolving door. So that just does not point to good stuff. And now, in May 2023, they... maybe not all's good. So let's dive into this. So VGC captured this, and basically staff have been announcing layoffs on LinkedIn. And some of their own sources are saying that this could be impacting up to 90 staff. Now, 90 staff is really rather rough when we heard that at the time they did their partnership with Sony, like they announced it, they were 100 strong. So I'm not feeling particularly good about this. Right? Like, a bunch of my colleagues and friends were laid off today. Okay. Unfortunately, I was affected by the layoffs today. I'm looking for, for more work. So quite a lot of people saying stuff like that. So far, Sony have not said anything about this. Deviation have not said anything about this. So we have absolutely no idea what the scope is like. But according to a software engineer's LinkedIn, Deviation recently ran into a difficult situation and was forced to make a number of layoffs. Now, of course, what could a difficult situation be? Something that impacts their cash position to this degree when the thing we know they're doing is working on an unannounced Sony IP, right? I mean, this does not reek of supported for years, if not generations, right? So it seems quite rough. I don't know if the project's dead, but it doesn't sound good. Could it be that this was going nowhere fast, that perhaps Sony are just killing off the project? Maybe Sony have realized that the way it'll go with Call of Duty, like they don't have to worry that much in the short term, and maybe they don't feel that this bet is worth making versus other safer bets that they can do that are attached to very premium IP that like they know performs well in the market. So pretty rough, but really the worst thing that can happen from Sony's perspective is getting a game up to the finish line and then that game falling over, because then that kind of like breaks their streak of just straight up humongous success games. And we actually did see something like that happen at the start of this gen with one of their own experiments, which was Destruction All-Stars. It was a launch window Sony published title from a third-party studio called Lucid Games. Right, it was the car combat game that basically everybody forgot. Kind of felt like a AA sort of tier live game. It was going to cost $70 originally, which was completely mad. Then they delayed it. Then it was free on PS Plus for 2 months, and then it was $20 to buy, which was probably the best that they could have done, right? Kind of like a similar trick to what they did with Fall Guys, but of course they published it, right? So it didn't really look that good. Kind of rough. Now, in the case of that game, I think Sony basically read the room and realized that no one in their right mind would be spending $70 on a game like that. I mean, $70, that's the new higher amount of money. You don't want to be selling people a Redfall for $70. It's not a good look. So, Sony have already made one big pivot for a published title in recent memory. What do we got to think about, right? Like, is it the case with Deviation that they've changed their mind? Maybe you now have a situation where that studio's cut to ribbons. and they're doing something else. We absolutely have no idea because nobody has officially commented on the matter. For some wider context here, so Sony have conducted a strategic review of their various projects and studios. This is probably some, general cost cutting across tech. The first of these casualties was Pixel Opus. They made Concrete Genie, so they're gone. And until now, they were working on a project in collaboration with Sony Pictures Entertainment for PS5. The status of that project is unknown, but, the studio doesn't exist anymore. Probably not good. And I suppose it's just Sony just thinking, you know what? Smaller games, who gives a shit? They don't move the needle. We don't care, right? That's the sort of thing that would make sense given what has worked for Sony in the past, right? Especially when, rather than make these in-house, they can just find indies that scream of Sony, like Stray, and just give them that humongous marketing support, right? The likes of that PS Plus launch that Stray had. As for Deviation, though, it maybe does make you wonder about those live service ambitions, because the other thing that we heard about was the shooter project from Final Strike Games that's been cancelled more than halfway through its expected development, which I suppose, if you were to assume the Deviation have lost their big shooter project and Final Strike have also lost their big shooter project, does that... I don't know. Is this Sony wanting to avoid a Crossfire X? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Overall, then, what does it mean? Are they abandoning their live service plans? I would say absolutely no. And that's definitely not the case when they are doing things such as purchasing unproven studios like Firewalk and Haven specifically to make first-party live services. I think this is more just a distillation and a doubling down, right? What do we see them do? I think you see with Pixel Opus, it's like, this is a scale of game that is not a Sony blockbuster. Why are we spending the effort on this? We should do other things, right? So... yeah, it's not going to be the kind of thing that made the PSX, PS1 days incredible with all those bizarre, wacky games, like your Ape Escapes. So, on one hand, you see that. On the other hand, with Deviation and Final Strike, I think it's just them probably being uncompromising. Maybe they would rather just take the tough decision now rather than to have some sort of bizarre Sea of Thieves-like situation where they're just like, help, we keep on building it, but it's not getting better and we can't release it. Oh no, all of our money's gone. And the game that we started 10 years ago no longer fits the market of today, right? Because I think that's ultimately the big fear that a lot of these companies will have as AAA development times just balloon and balloon and balloon and balloon. Especially in a case like this, where it's a game that was also supposed to have a very, very, very intricate campaign as well, right? Which, that's going to have a few different constraints for your game engine. I mean, you're going to have to be able to do some pretty sexy, cool things in your single-player campaign so that it justifies its own existence. And then that single-player campaign, can't just be another shooter campaign. It has to be brilliant. It has to be a Sony blockbuster campaign and a live service. Maybe they just thought, this is too much. Is this like trying to do a quadruple A Call of Duty? And then you realize it takes Activision all of the bodies in the planet to keep Call of Duty going. Maybe they just didn't think they could do it with that studio. Maybe the way to enter this market from a live service perspective is to do what Ubisoft are doing with X-Defiant, right? And, go lean and laser targeted. I'd say probably that. Overall then, expect lots of Sony live services, but expect them to be existing within their established brands where, hey, it's an established brand. It's a lot easier to get the message out because people already know how to think about and process the experience that you're trying to sell to them. So it's quite interesting. I think this is probably just Sony being smart and trying to deploy their money in a smart way because ultimately there is literal cost, but there's also opportunity cost. And if that capital can be deployed on a safer bet that is more aligned with their brand, where they have a far higher, percentage of success expectation, then obviously they will deploy their resources in that way, even if it does mean big layoffs and turmoil, because ultimately they do not exist to support jobs, right? They are not a charity. They exist to sell video games and make their platform be, as much as is possible, the dominant platform with cultural mindshare, which is exactly what they've been succeeding at. There you go! That's the video. It's over now. You can check out the other ones that we've done. And of course, if you want to support what we're doing, you can check out our sponsor too. All right. Thanks for watching. See you next time.